Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tiki Bar. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Marshall Hamilton. He's in Nashville, Tennessee. He is the director of business systems operation at Sprout Social. Marshall, thanks so much for doing this. How are you?
Yeah, doing well, Kevin. Great to talk to you and good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. Marshall and I were just catching up before this. He was one of the first ever people to be very kind to us with his time at Boogie Board and provided some of the insights that everyone now sees in the product. So we're super appreciative to catch up with him here. All right, Marshall, we ask everyone the first question. Same first question when we jump in. What did you want to be when you were a kid?
I have a wide range of varying answers because I think my perspective shifted a lot as a kid. I think the earliest version of this is in a yearbook from the fourth grade where I said I wanted to be an animator. So I wanted to go into cartoonist. I think as I went through my childhood, I got into medicine and was super interested in becoming a veterinarian. And then when I was applying to school, actually for college, I wanted to be an engineer. And one of the turning points of that is I met a bunch of people throughout that process of applying to college and who were engineers professionally who basically like turned me away from it. Like, if you like these things about being an engineer, you should stop pursuing this because you're going to hate those things by the end of school. And it was just a lot of turning points. I ended up going to school for marketing and advertising. And interesting turning point there was actually like I took an internship for a week or kind of like a shadow internship with the limited brands when I was based in Ohio. And that kind of turned me on this idea of marketing and advertising and what that looks like within a business. And I think that day-to-day kind of insight into an office really kind of spurred some gears for me on what I could be doing in the future.
Interesting. So was that internship your first professional experience? Did you have jobs as a kid? Any odd jobs, things like that?
I had lots of odd jobs. I mean, I think like a lot of under the table work. I used to go scour neighborhoods as a kid. I moved a ton when I was growing up for people with moving trucks because movers would always pay you like $20 to help out with like moving stuff around or kind of find ways to get cash. My first like here's a W-2 job was I was a telemarketer for a survey company. And that was a really interesting experience. It was pencil and paper surveys. And these are all people who like signed up to be called. And these are paid surveys, right? So it's like if they make it to the end of the survey that you're giving them $100 or $150 or whatever. But it's, you're doing 200 to 300 dials a night manually on a phone. There's no auto dialing. The pencil and paper is important because like if they didn't make it to the survey, you didn't get another paper. You just like erased the one you had. So that was a really interesting job. The most fascinating thing to me is like people sign up for this service and like want to get called in theory, and then you call them and you get like a wide range of hostility to acceptance to whatever. So yeah, that was a super interesting job. My job after that actually ended up being I did the night shift at a gas station for a while, which was just to like bridge the gap between high school and college, and another place where you meet just like a whole host of interesting characters and personas.
Okay, so you're in high school or just after high school when you're doing this cold calling gig?
I was in high school, so I was driving, so I was 16 at earliest, and it was like the office was right by the local mall, so I think I drove like 20 minutes after school, and it was kind of nighttime gig. It was like after school, probably started around 5 p.m. and I would call until like 9. And yeah, it would be like corporations who had a new product or service that they wanted to like get testers for, or they kind of like hire this consulting firm to call, and you get like little spot bonuses from like tobacco companies who are doing this or from clothing companies or what have you, who are kind of hiring it on. If you do a good job, you got like, kickbacks from those programs too.
That's interesting. So I remember my first time stepping into cold calling. I was very apprehensive and kind of wondering, like, oh man, what did I get myself into here? Was that you, or are you more of an extroverted, no problem with that kind of?
I am the furthest thing from an extrovert that probably exists. Like I think our generation in general was like the most excited when online pizza ordering became a thing. I was like, you don't have to call someone or interact with someone to do this. But it really was kind of like a trial by fire. There's no training on how to do this job. It was like, here's a script. You follow the script verbatim, dial a bunch of numbers and see what happens, basically. And, the script only covers what you're supposed to talk about. When someone's like trying to hassle you on the phone, like there's no real way to do that. So you kind of work your way through that. And I think it's, it's up there with doing service jobs as a kid and thinking about like, you have to learn how to interact with the general public in all manners of situations. And this was like a good crash course in how to do that, and also like build some thick skin on the types of interactions you could have. Because it was far from a professional environment in terms of like you're calling people at their homes in most cases. You're calling people about something that they probably forgot they signed up for 9 months before, and usually during dinner time, which is like not the time that people really want to take a survey. So it was an interesting experience for sure.
Well, that's interesting. Good on you. I'm sure your sales cohorts that you managed and dealt with later in life got nothing on you then from that experience. So I want to get into how you ended up at DePaul. You mentioned you studied, I think, marketing and advertising. So can you just kind of tell the story why you went to school there, what you were thinking about, if you had ideas for your next professional experience?
Yeah, it was kind of a funny story. I applied to college under or university under the guise of being an engineer. So I was like looking at engineering schools. Like there's a lot of small schools on the East Coast that I was really interested in. A buddy of mine, we always joke about this because he has a very similar story to me. We kind of chose DePaul out of a hat. DePaul was on the common application. I'd never visited the school. So like I never set foot until the day I was moving into the dorms. And as I looked across the schools I got into, as I was looking at like where I applied, I was like, here's a bunch of engineering schools that are really cool, but like I don't want to do engineering anymore. What do I have that's a little bit more generalist? What do I have that's maybe a little interesting? And the idea of moving to Chicago, I had lived in like the suburbs of Columbus for a few years at that point. And I was like, this is an interesting change. I grew up moving every 2 years, so like new places didn't scare me or anything like that, but it felt cool to go to a big city. And yeah, so I chose DePaul without knowing very much about it, and originally like kind of accepted as a to be declared major, and shifted into marketing as a part of that internship, kind of like as I shifted out of high school.
And so I'm picking up that you're industrious throughout because you're tracking these moving trucks. You're willing to do cold calling in high school, and then at DePaul, I saw you're doing some internships and also involved in student ministry. I'm just curious how that kind of industrious spirit shaped, what you did in college, and then your ultimate decision on what to do after.
Yeah, I'm not someone who likes to sit still. Like I think I always want to learn something new or do something new. I have a penchant for like how do I make new and interesting stories, and I think it's a way of, can you say yes to opportunities, and can you kind of jump into things or take advantage of like what's happening around you. But yeah, I think to your point, I took a bunch of internships throughout college. It was an interesting, like DePaul is a split campus, so there's like a kind of like the northern part of Chicago as part of the campus, and then most of the business school and the marketing school is actually downtown. So you are kind of doing like a work commute each day for your classes, and so you take the train in. And it was like not a far jump to be like, well, now I just want to go to an office and work. And so I started doing like internships during the day and then night classes. It was just like a really healthy rhythm for me, and taught me a lot about kind of like small businesses and how they operate, and like systems and tools, and how do you be scrappy and wear a bunch of hats. And then I got me exposure to a host of other companies and businesses, and like associations became a really big thing for me, which was how do I get plugged into the professional network of Chicago as a college student. And also like became a really solid inroad of like, how do I give back to the community? How do I think about kind of careers or businesses I want to be a part of? What types of jobs actually exist in the marketplace that are good fits for me? So all those things kind of like came together as just saying yes to a lot of opportunities, showing up sometimes to like ridiculous events or things that are a little abstract, but always kind of taking something that's beneficial from it.
Oh, I love that. That's like a super embedded college experience. And then that leads you to, at the time, Groupon, absolute rocket ship. I've met so many people from that kind of era, Groupon in Chicago. So can you tell me the story of how you got into Groupon and what the first gig was like?
Yeah, so a fun story. This is a fun story too, is I was working for a print advertising firm at the time as a PM. And so I was project managing a bunch of things. And PM was kind of like an umbrella term. I was like doing a ton of office stuff, which was cool and useful. Like I learned Excel at a level that like I probably never would have otherwise without this business. And got kind of a lot of insight to a smaller business. But one of the things I identified was I was trying to like push for some changes in the business, and like just couldn't get traction with some of these things. And I was like, I really feel like I need to know how to sell. So very serendipitously, I was at like a potluck with some friends. This girl kind of hassled me about not taking some of her cookies off the table as like part of the plate that I made. And so we started talking, and she's like, well, what do you do? And I was like, I'm PM at this company. And she said, well, have you thought about sales? And I was like, actually, I have thought about sales. She was a recruiter for Groupon. And so was able to get plugged in there, and a great family friend of mine had worked there. And so she called me and like prepped me for the interview, because I really didn't know what to do for that business. And the interview process for Groupon was, here's a business and their menu, like a restaurant, construct a deal and then sell us why that deal makes sense for the business. And so doing that cold is a really interesting experience, because like, I don't know how business restaurant margins work. I don't know how, I'm approaching a business owner. It's like their blood life, right? Their sweat and tears is going into this business. And how am I approaching them about discounting? And so, so I ended up with this opportunity to join as like, basically an undergrad or a fresh grad with very little like sales experience in this capacity, selling to small business owners. And it was a really cool kind of first foray into the sales environment. And also like, again, another trial by fire of like, you're calling on a town, and it's like, you're gonna call every business in town and try to like get them on a Groupon, which is a really fun experience.
Yeah, that's super cool. Did you notice that muscle you built in high school was probably some sort of advantage for now? It's like, okay, you have a little bit more of a brand behind you. but you're still calling these small businesses. So I imagine like super activity high, but you probably felt like you're pretty skilled at that relative to someone coming into a green.
Yeah, I think the tough skin definitely helped, which is like I wasn't super phased by people, shining you off the phone, or it was all cold callers, not like a lot of cold emailing or anything like that, which is, it wasn't like a traditional SaaS outreach model. What I thought changed the most is where I didn't have like a brand or like a style of sale when I was doing cold calling for that previous business, I started developing one really quickly for Groupon. And so like my superpower is like, how do I connect the math to somebody? And it's like, I'm not an emotive seller. I'm not somebody who's gonna, like be your best friend on the sale necessarily, but I am somebody who's going to help you like think through the options and like give you like a really rational picture as to what's going on. And so that's what I spent the majority of my time doing, is kind of like building this brand and this like kind of story around how do I sell with the things I'm really good at, and leaning into the additional skills I picked up in my previous role with like math, numbers, processes, and systems to scale my outreach in a way and kind of target the businesses I got really good at selling to.
That's interesting. How long did it take before you knew that was your style, this kind of thoughtful sales style? Because I would imagine, you run into these companies, all of a sudden you're supposed to be challenger. The caricature of a salesperson is a boisterous person, but there's of course an angle for that more of engineering mindset, ROI driven sales type. Did you find that you had to go against the grain there, or did you figure out that that was your fit early on?
I started to figure it out pretty quickly. I mean, like, I think the beautiful thing about sales is the feedback is almost immediate, right? You have a bad day in sales, you're like, I understand that I had a bad day. If you have a bad day in a lot of other careers, it's like, I don't find out for a month that I had really like a bad day or what that really meant. And so the feedback's immediate. And I think taking the time to self-reflect is like, well, what's working and like what feels like it's not working, right? Because I think one of the Groupon's things they were known for was sales training and how they thought about approaching, like, take anybody off the street effectively who has the ability to think through these kinds of problems and then teach them how to sell. And they had, like a pretty broad sales training process, which is helpful because it captures a lot of different techniques and skills. And they didn't like pick a methodology early on and say like, this is what everyone needs to do. They talked more about like sales philosophy and broadly, like what are some techniques that happen to work. But so, yeah, I think within a few months, I was like, this is the way I can be successful at this job. This is the way I'm going to be performant. Let's get really good at this talk track, this kind of skill set that I want to develop so I can do well here.
Well, it obviously worked because I'm going through LinkedIn, and you became a manager at like a super young age, and then kind of continued up the chain from there. But I want to talk about that first managerial experience. Most people I know, when they get into sales management, especially, there's like this moment where it's okay, this is a little different than I thought, or I didn't know that this was part of it. Did that moment happen for you?
Yeah, I think challenging conversations is the thing that I think catches people the most off guard. There's usually the thing that draws people to management is like, I like helping people. I want to be like the champion of helping other people be successful. And it's this really great picture of like, how do I mentor and coach and lead and like be a servant leader? And I think there's a lot of goodness there. I think challenging conversations are the thing that no one is the most prepared for, because in our personal lives, we also don't have generally a lot of great experience with like difficult conversations up to that point. And that's even different than like having a difficult conversation on the phone with a cold prospect. Having one with somebody who you've like built up a relationship with and rapport with, and knowing, especially in sales, it's like it's a path, right? Like if you're having a difficult conversation, you're often setting them down a path of performance management, or trying to figure out like, how do I coach you in a way that helps you get through this and develops and grows, or help you set on a path that's a better fit for you, right? And I think getting that mentality down and figuring out how do you disassociate some of like the difficult or challenging relational feelings from how do you set someone on a path that actually is beneficial for them long term, and like think of yourself as truly as a leader rather than just like a peer, as I think is it's a good transitional moment. But it is challenging. It's a hard shift for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah. Last night I was actually writing down how I need to have a better conflict conversation with my son, who's now 5 and has like ideas that I realize I can't approach it with the same politeness that I sometimes try to at work. And it's the same thing. It's like we've indexed so hard on people pleasing, but like you said, sometimes you have to lead.
Yep. Yep.
All right, so I want to talk about Groupon kind of as a company then, and what the arc of it meant to you over your time there. What type of like growth were you experiencing? What was that environment like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely high velocity sales, really fast sales cycles. Everything felt all at once, right? Like it didn't feel like we were necessarily and I think I'll speak to this as a perspective of somebody who was like on the floor selling at first, right? It felt like everything was happening all at once. At a higher level, it felt like people were putting, more thought to like the roadmap and everything else. But like when you're in the boots on the ground, it's like, here's a new initiative, here's a new sales technique, here's a new market territory, here's what a promotion path looks like. A lot of things shifted so fast. It was just a lot to keep up with, which was good. It was like we were always interested in new and exciting and different things. The culture there was kind of electric. It was like a lot of young people, a lot of people who were passionate about like doing things other than their job. So like you had a lot of really good dynamic conversations about like what are people doing with their spare time, and it's in Chicago. So like Chicago's a fun summer city, less fun winter city, but like good place to be. And a lot of great relationships were kind of forged and bonded, and friendships kind of emerged through those years. And I think like even now you'll see like Chicago's a fairly small tech scene. Like everyone largely knows each other. There's a lot of tight relationships that have spread out to other businesses that kind of originated at Groupon. And like those early years, especially of kind of like getting a handle on what does like an enterprise business look like, forged some of these really tight bonds. And I think that's something that startups all the way through kind of like mid and large size companies benefit from, is like you forge through challenging times. And if you see those opportunities as like, this is an opportunity not only to build my skill set, but also an opportunity to like make a lot of people that I trust as part of my friend group or my network group. It's a really cool magical time.
Oh, I love that. All right. And so you've got this arc of company growth, and then there's this personal growth too, because you're going from managing an initial sales team, you started as a sales rep before that, and then you're managing like, 20 plus reps, 20 plus BDRs by the time that you're done there. And so what is your arc as a manager there? You mentioned the conflict conversations early. What were you doing by the end that you probably had no idea about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really interesting. The team sizes were large. It was one of those moments where it's like I got 20 people reporting to me. 90 to 95% of my day is like one-on-ones, and kind of like how do I engage with the team? And I think there was a balance of like, some people ascribe to like you're going to spend most of your time with your A and B players, and like your C players you kind of manage out. And I think that's an okay framework, but I think it misses the mark sometimes. Diagnosing why you have C players and thinking about like, how do you make sure that those people exit well, and rather than just kind of like cutting them because of numbers. And so I spent a lot of time with my team trying to identify, are they in the right sales fit, right? Because I think at some point we would verticalize and we were selling to things to do, so which is like a leisure and activities vertical, which is like a very specific type of sale. Is that the right type of sale for them, right? Would they rather be in restaurants? Would they rather be in services? Like, do they need a different margin? Or is there a different fit in the company that makes sense? Because like onboarding employees is expensive. Can we put them somewhere that we can still leverage like their amazing talent in a different capacity? And so I spent a lot of time on kind of those facets as a business leader, trying to think about like, how do I make my team as successful for the company as I can, while still maximizing our performance and making sure that our team is hitting goal and all the things that are really important. The other thing that was really helpful about Groupon broadly is they had an amazing opportunity of like, if you want to wear a bunch of hats, you can wear as many hats as you'd like. So I got into like operations, and I got into like working with our finance team, and I got into like product teams conversations. And it just kind of like got to be in a lot of places I otherwise would not have in the role that I was in. And that gave me exposure from a leadership perspective as like, here's how decisions are being made and why they're being made, and how do I like articulate them better. And like that funnels into your leadership style. Is you can be a really informed leader, or you can be somebody who like leads by kind of character and principle, or how do you want to think about those attributes? But also like a skill development piece, which is like I was just learning how to do things in a business that I otherwise wouldn't have had capacity to do if I was just a sales leader in many other businesses. And that's carried through into my current career. Is like I've always had like an operator mindset. There's pieces of my past of being a PM and working on more technical work that has carried through and like has given me kind of additional layers of capability to support my teams and help them be successful. So yeah, I think watching the company grow is really cool. Watching myself grow and my teams grow. I still keep in touch with a lot of the people who I managed through those years. And like I was just in South Carolina with my family for vacation and ran into somebody I'd managed at like a restaurant. He was just sitting next to me. I was like, I'm pretty sure, I haven't seen him in 10 years. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that that's that person. So we had a chance to catch up, which was good. But yeah, it's just kind of a neat exposure of like, how do we all learn together? And I think that's a shared experience for a lot of the people who were there at the same time as I was.
Yeah, I love that confluence of human capital that you touch on, along with this following your curiosity and how that sort of relates to skill development. And I want to talk about that curiosity because I imagine it was part of what pulled you over to Sprout Social. So can you tell the story of how you got hooked into Sprout?
Yeah, it was a stage in my life where I think I'd been at Groupon for 5 years, and I, was just kind of curious, like what else was out there, and I started having conversations with some people around other companies that are kind of up and coming in the tech scene. When I had gotten to Groupon, it had just finished its IPO, and it was around like 14,000-ish employees. So I was looking for something a little smaller, just to experience like what does a smaller company feel like. And Sprout was on my radar, and almost serendipitously, I got approached by a recruiter who was like, "Hey, this is an opportunity for you." And really what pulled me over is I had my first kind of initial meetings with team members, which was interesting because a lot of the team members I was originally supposed to meet with were ex-Groupon employees, like who I knew and was close with. And so like we're actually giving you people who you don't know. And so I had a good conversation with them. And two things really sold me on it. One is there was just this really great air of leadership there of like, here's what our vision is for the product and for the company, and here's how our teams operate. And then the second one is just like the people themselves were passionate beyond the role. And what I mean by that is, if you're in a specific function, you might be really excited about the work that you do. These people were all really excited about the impact of the company. And I felt like that was just like a very different sentiment. And so when we started talking about what roles would be a good fit, I came in as an S&B sales leader. And it was like, here's a whole new industry, a whole new sales process, a whole new kind of methodology to learn. But it was with these people who are really great at both leadership and building products, and had this vision for like how the company could make an impact that was like just, again, like it was like a rocket ship, not only for the company, but like for you personally, feeling like I was just jazzed up every day going into work.
So what was the biggest learning curve of those components? You mentioned new industry, new product set. Social itself is still relatively, young at that point. What is the biggest thing you had to learn?
Yeah, I think SaaS business models, I was like maybe barely aware of at the time. So like, how does the economics of it work? And with that, sales processes that weren't full cycle. I think actually that was probably the biggest turning moment for me, is like thinking about when we say BDRs at Groupon, that was a full cycle rep. And so every BD at Groupon was doing end-to-end prospecting through close. Whereas in a SaaS business, it's typically like a BDR is doing prospecting and appointment setting. You've got your A's running your cycles, and you've got CSMs and kind of post-sales growth. And so kind of figuring out how does the dynamic work there is like, some of the tricks that you pull when you're doing full cycle is different, right? And it's just a different ballgame than if you were to do it in kind of a really focused AE cycle for a SaaS business. Some of my techniques still applied though, which is like when we needed levers to pull, I could pull lists of businesses and companies down like nobody's business. Like that was something I was really skilled at, is like I had the technical chops to go find pockets of opportunity for the team and bring that to bear. And I also believe as an AE, like you are responsible for your own book. If you feel like you're not getting fed enough, like let's go hunt, like let's go find more stuff for us to do. And like that's how we keep it fun, is like you learn how to prospect and you get excited about a pocket of industries that you can expertly know. Like let's go for it.
Okay, and so you go on to run multiple sales teams at Sprout. What was the impetus for the move to Seattle?
Yeah, so Seattle, again, kind of like serendipitously, I was like, I'm interested in my personal life about moving out west and kind of thinking about it. And I came into work one day, and our executive team had asked if I would. Told me that they're acquiring a company out west, and they're like, "Would you go out and be a part of this?" I didn't even have to like think about it, because it was like a bunch of things had lined up. But like the place I was living was getting sold. Like I owned a condo at the time. I was being deconverted into apartments. So I was like, I have to move anyways. Around the same time, I was already thinking about moving. And I was like, sure, yeah, I'll do this. Let's figure it out. And I think I had about 2 months to like figure out the move and get out there. But moved sight unseen effectively to Seattle to be head of sales for that sales team. And that was a really cool opportunity. Again, like went back to a lot of full cycle, where it's like I'm managing SD and BD and AEs and then post-sales growth, and also helping to like integrate a business and thinking about how our systems and tools and technologies and like just the rhythms of those two businesses need to work together effectively.
Yeah, I would imagine that that stroked at your engineering brain a bit. Can you talk a little bit more about that integration? What was that acquisition like? How did you find your role in it and start tinkering?
Yeah, I think, the core of it was figuring out like how do the two sales teams interact, right? You've got suddenly a singular sales funnel broken into two. So a little bit of it is like designing systems to traffic cop and like prevent collision. How do you think about two teams working in tandem together and not competing anymore, right? Like these two products should be collaborative. And their sales rhythms were totally different, because Simply Measured at the time was smaller than Sprout. And so Sprout had like built out solutions engineering, a whole bunch of other functions around their sales process that Simply didn't have. But Simply also had this really amazing technique of like, how do they sell using data from social funnels? And so we had to teach both parties how to do their jobs in a collaborative fashion, which was a really kind of amazing experience. And the teams did great with it. Like we did a lot of work culturally to make sure that the teams felt like they were in tune and in touch. We spent a lot of times meeting with the teams together and like getting in person and making sure that it felt like a true partnership, rather than like, here's this remote office that exists that is also part of Sprout. It was like, no, you are Sprout, And here's how these two teams can collaborate and pair together. It's always, acquisitions can be really messy, but I think that there is this like through line of like, we're all together in this. And the fact that Sprout did this really great job of taking a few of us out there to kind of be like seed members actually helped so much with that, because we were really passionate about the business that we came from and the office we came from. And also like the people that we were leading in the Seattle office really cared about them and their well-being and making sure that they had what they needed.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And your next move to me now feels inevitable because I kind of know your story. But then you start running. You're the director of sales strategy. Can you tell the story from when you knew it was time to officially make the jump?
Yeah, it was, towards the end of the acquisition being integrated, I started having a lot of conversations around like what's next, right? So you can't have two heads of sales. You can't have like kind of two competing organizations, not competing, but like two overlapping organizations in the same way. And so I started thinking about, like there's one path, which is slotting into the sales organization as it is. And I can continue to be a sales leader and like figure out, what team do I want to lead and do that. The other path was I just saw a lot of opportunities. I was like, here's stuff. If we had somebody with seniority and ownership and time, we could go get done. And so I pitched that as a role. I was like, I don't know what this looks like. I made a map of like, you fit this role somewhere in the business. And this is where the alignment kind of works out. If you put it in operations, it looks like this. If you put it on like channel and partnerships, it looks like this. If you put it under like the executive team, it looks like this. And I was like, I think we can make a case for any of these, but like, here's my case and what I think this role could be accomplished in the first 12 months or so. And it ended up being kind of like a fixer role in a lot of cases. It was, branded as an operational role, which was super helpful to work with like the sales teams on how do we think about territory design, which is how you and I met. How do we think about like sales process and enablement? How do we think about the technologies that we buy? But over time, I also accumulated more responsibility. So I took on things like our channel team. So I said, here's channel sales and how are we going to think about partnerships? I also built out a project management function. So how do we think about like the burgeoning aspects of a PMO and what is that going to look like at the company? I took over our internal tech stack. So for sales, it was like, here's all the stuff we're going to buy to make sure our sales teams are most effective. And was able to just jump in on a lot of problems to try to see where I can be an impactful person. And in some of those functions, it was like I matured it to a certain level. And I was like, you know what? This should go to somebody who's dedicated to this and not just be like a hat that someone wears. And that was also really fun. So like designing new systems and teams and like functions and seeing like this proves value. And now it's good enough that someone else should go like run and execute at scale. It also kind of scratches that part of my brain, which is like always be learning. It's like, here's a new thing I need to discover or understand that benefits me like intellectually. And that's always super compelling for me to keep on that track.
Yeah, so you actually created the role, and I'm curious which of those maybe was there something hidden, maybe an area you didn't realize you were investing in that actually blew up and turned out to be a great decision, or an area in that initial hypothesis that you missed that ended up being a big part of your role? I'm curious from a hypothesis to what actually manifested. What comes to mind?
Yeah, I think there's two things, and it kind of is the through line to what I do now. So when I think about the stuff that got me really excited about my day, which was like, I like puzzles. It's like, I like solving hard problems. And it's like, here's a thing. And sometimes, I'd get like an email at like 11 p.m. This is before I was married and had kids. So like different energy. But it's like, I got an email at 11 p.m. It's like, here's a thing that we're thinking of, or here's a thing that we identified as an opportunity. And I would just like pull an all-nighter and be like, I have the burgeoning idea of what this could be as a fix. And like, here's a proof of concept for it in the next morning. I was like, this got me really jazzed and excited. So like systems and operational puzzles are really fun. And the other one is businesses have to thread this needle as they evolve of like what's right for the business at that moment.
Mm.
And that might mean that you're making temporary decisions that get you through the next 6 months before the next iteration of your business needs to exist. And I think across all the functions that I was a part of, that was kind of the needle we tried to thread. And that was really interesting and also kind of like compelling to me, which is I have to think in a dual fashion. Short term, here's the investments we're making to make sure the business can do what it needs to do to execute and be successful. And then long term, we have to keep this eye on the prize of like, we know that some of this stuff is going to get ripped down and rebuilt over time. And that's going to be okay. Like the decisions you make now are not wrong. They're just momentary. And also coaching a team around this idea of like, just because we're going to tear this down in 9 to 10 months doesn't mean it was a bad decision. It just means it was the right decision now and it's not going to be in 10 months. And you got to be okay with that. Like we subscribe no ownership to these programs and no like personal relation to them other than the success they had in the moment. So I think those two things were really exciting to me and like kind of kept things interesting and helped us have a really positive look on what can be a really like fast moving and almost jarring experience of like priority shifts. But our team motto for a long time was first or better. We're either going to be the first person to do something or we're going to do it better than it's being done. And I think that that's a good motto of like, You either are innovating or you're improving, and nothing is ever static. Our business before IPO, very different than after IPO. Our business at 1,000 employees is very different at 1,500 employees. And you need to support all of those facets.
So it pretty naturally then leads into, I imagine, what you're doing today, running AI initiatives across the company. Can you take us through what your remit is today, how you arrived there?
Yeah, so similar conversation as I think I started talking to business leaders about kind of what's next, like what should I be focused on? And here's the stuff I'm interested in. And AI is everywhere, right? I think 2.5-ish years ago when I started this conversation, it was just kind of like burgeoning in a lot of business conversations. I think GPT-3 was about to come out, and it was like this moment of like, here's something really compelling that's about to happen. I'm very intellectually interested in like what the direction of this technology and the impact it could have, and would love to be really engaged here. And in my previous role, I saw the immediate gains of like, this is helping me write SQL faster, and this is helping me ideate way faster. And like, reporting challenges that would take me like an afternoon took me like 10 minutes. And like, this is the thing I can use very fast within my personal role to get good at it. And it's only gotten so much better since then. So I started having that conversation of like, here's what I think this role could be and what it could look like. And my role in remit is not just AI, it's also automation today. And I support, I actually moved from the revenue wing to under IT. So I live in the technology wing now as I think about like the systems and tools that I impact. My scope became bigger, which is like, here's more teams for you to try to think about this problem for than just sales, which is interesting too. In the first 9 months I spent as an IC, I was like, I'm just going to focus on the things within the business that we need to prioritize adjusting and impacting to make sure that we can be prepared for what this technology looks like long term. And so that's, creating principles and policies, thinking about like legal processes for us to start. Every company was coming out with AI tools with varying different policies and procedures and legal guidelines. And so we had to start thinking about that. And so I spent a lot of time kind of thinking about like, what's our roadmap for systems and investments? You go out and buy OpenAI licenses for everybody. Do you do something different? Like, how are you making these decisions? And I think everyone in the market was trying to figure out the same kind of a roadmap early on, because it felt like if you didn't do something, you were going to be behind. But it also felt like if you did too much, you were going to be like underwater with too much technology. And so again, fun to thread a needle and figure that out. About 9 months in, I also took on the automation function. So as we think about like iPaaS solutions and more traditional automations, that team also reports to me now. And as we think about that, that's also like a really interesting aspect of this, because AI and automation, as you think about it, become one over time, right? Like what we thought of as RPA or more traditional automation becomes an AI function in most cases. And I would say like 70 to 80% of what people ask for in most cases are an automation. Like they're just thinking about it more because AI is kind of like spurring this, like, I don't want to do this. I wish something else could do this for me. And it's like, that's just an automation. We don't even need an LLM for that. It becomes a really healthy conversation.
That's really interesting. Yeah, we deal with that a lot in messaging for our business, is folks kind of want to understand where the AI starts and where the automation is, when really it's a question of, can you solve for the workflow? And okay, so you're not in just go to market now, you're across these multiple business areas, so large remit. You've got these ethos of it's okay if we kind of build quickly and have to tear down, but at the same time now you've got the rate of change of the technology is actually like ramping way up. How do you kind of keep your eyes up and know what's going on in the market while also solving for this like infrastructure build that you're doing at the?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I think this is something that's like, it's hard to articulate sometimes exactly how do you keep up with the rate of change in this space. And I think for me, I created a framework of like, here's how I approach every news story, article, research paper, LinkedIn post on the topic, which is like, there's 4 major components of how people should think about each announcement. One, is it relevant to you, right? Like that's your first barrier, is like, there's a lot of cool stuff, but I don't work in medicine. So it's if there's like, that's solving problems better than doctors, right? It's an interesting tidbit. I don't really need to know much about it because it doesn't relate to me in a super deep fashion. The second one is there's a geopolitical lens of this, right? Like all of this should be viewed for the lens of like, there is a geopolitical race going on, right? As we think about who's going to get to market with the best LLMs fastest. There's a economic lens of this, which is companies are selling a product. And so there's a lot of news media that is like bombastic and thinking about like these really sensationalist claims on both positive and negative aspects of LLMs. But like, we have to recognize there's a lot of revenue behind this that people are kind of hoping to move forward with. And the fourth part, sorry, is there is like this whole framework of research going on. Like we are experimenting at a rate that we have all never had exposure to in the public eye. And it's really cool. Like it's really interesting to watch these research labs publish papers, and all of us are all reading research papers all of a sudden, where I don't know if 90% of the people who are reading research papers were like doing that 5 years ago. This is a very new and interesting space for us. So those lenses allow me to help filter down to the stuff that's most relevant to me, help me to like take myself out of the emotional or like whiplash that's happening in the market and focus on like, here's the stuff I can deliver to the team. Here's proven use cases that we can think about. Here's innovation and things I want to experiment with to see how it would play with our business. But I'm not getting tied up in like, this model is better, this model is better, or like this new thing is on the horizon and it may come in 6 to 12 months. It's like, that's too far out. We should be prepared for it. But like, I don't need to burn a lot of the calories on that at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. It's ironic because the metaphor that comes to mind for me is like precision medicine. You know, where it's you thinking about the medicine tailored to you and based on your genes and what it is that you need, and in the same way you're thinking about the news and the developments as related to your context, so filtering things down. I think that makes a lot of sense. How has your thinking about technology more broadly evolved since your early days? You're interested in engineering, started as a salesperson. Now you're dealing with engineers, like you're deep in it. So how has your thinking about actual technology?
Look at technology. And so when you look at a company broadly, it's like, well, there's actually overlapping technology in these different pockets. Like, let's try to understand why that exists. Why are these features better for this team versus this team, and try to get to like the root cause. And I think as I look ahead within the marketplace for technology, I think that's where a lot of this changes is we all make some trade-offs when we think about buying software. It's like, this is good, or this is the best enough, right? Like, this is the best in class, but it's best enough for us. And best enough means like every business operates a little bit differently. Everyone has a little bit like unique requirements. No software in the world could feasibly support every individual nuance of a business. But like, what's the best in class enough for us to make the most of this and see the productivity gains we expect? And I think what we're going to see with the advent of technology and how it's evolving is like, we don't need to settle at the same rate as we have, which is like features can be developed more rapidly. Things can be customized in almost real time. There's really cool generative AI UI use cases where it's like, this is, instead of us designing 20 plus screens in Salesforce for this, like they have a generative UI product. And it's like, this is a screen that's tailored for you as a user at the moment you load the screen. And it's like, that's awesome because it solves this problem of us like trying to do just enough to make people satisfied. It's like, this is going to be dynamic in real time. And so I think my shift on technology is like, I think the timelines have shifted too, is like the amount of commitment you want to make towards the software changes because the space is changing so fast. But also in the current state with generative AI, it's also like, how do you separate hype from actual impact? Like solving a real business problem that has material impact is a much stronger value proposition than I think we've had to see in the past. There's a lot of like really cool stuff I want to go play with. And like, that's not an interesting enough reason to invest in most cases. Like, I actually need to be able to solve a problem for enough of a cohort of people to justify investments at this stage.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. I'm pulling back a little bit. So you've been at Sprout for 8 years, and what's kept you at Sprout through all these different roles?
It's the different roles. I think it's probably part of it, which is I'm always, I've been very fortunate in my career to have the opportunity to kind of carve out a lot of my own path and work with some really incredible leaders who've enabled me to kind of chase the problems I want to chase and to create value where I feel like I can create the most amount of value, which is, I think, unique to Sprout. It's like it's not just me, like they've done this for a lot of people, but it's how do we give back to the business using the talents and skill sets we have? And they're really good at like nurturing and fostering and adopting that. I also still work with an incredible group of leaders, right? Like this is a company where I joined because the leadership and the vision, and I stick around because the leadership and the vision. Like it's a really cool opportunity to see how that's evolved and seeing the differences in like how the company has scaled and how perspectives change is like one of the most interesting things I remember about the day we IPO'd at Sprout was we did like a light brunch and like light celebration on the day that we rang the bell, back to business as usual. It wasn't like this crazy blowout party or anything like that. It was like, we're going to keep this as like, this is just a state change. This doesn't change how we operate our business. And we shouldn't be thinking about it as like everyone's job is upended as a result of this news. And it was a really humbled version of how to pursue that. And I think that humility has kind of carried through Sprout's internal policies and how we think about the business operating and how we think about like becoming a culture that people want to be a part of.
This isn't the end. That's excellent. That's excellent. I'm sure the customers would love to hear that story. And you also stayed connected to DePaul. I was reading a blog through DePaul that you're engaged with kind of teaching some students through the use of Sprout. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so I've kept in touch with that university, both when I'm in town and I can like drop in and try to visit classes, but also just with some of the professors and thinking about like how is social changing and how do we think about preparing students to use the technology that's going to help them in a marketing career. So I've been really in touch with the marketing organization at DePaul, and specifically a couple of professors who lead classes there. And so I typically drop in once a quarter for a class to just talk about like, here's what Sprout is, and here's how we think about like the approach of social as a business. Because social as a user is a very different experience than if you're at Nike and you're using a social media software, right? Like you're approaching it from two different lenses. And also the tools that are available to you are dramatically different. And so I've worked with the university or DePaul University to like build out a curriculum and think about how do we approach social media as an educational tool, and also again prepare students to use social media technology as they enter the workforce or their internships or kind of like engage there. I just think college is like such a vulnerable time to think about how do you get the right skills to enter the workforce confidently. And I think it's something I've always been passionate about. Like, how do we prepare young people to do well in that next phase of life?
Wow, I love that. This is my final question. So, what's a great piece of content that you find yourself recommending to people that they check out? Could be multiple pieces of content. Bonus points if it's not in the go to market or sales.
Yeah, there's a bunch of books that I can probably throw out there. Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick is a really good read. Like most of these are going to be AI based, just because like there's top of mind. Super Agency is a really good one by Reid Hoffman. And both of those, I think, in tandem, I recommend to my team. I recommend to a lot of people just because it helps to break the vision out a little bit more about like, what does AI look like conceptually, and also like take us away from, again, like those kind of gnarly headlines that are in the market of like, here's all the terrible things that might happen or all the amazing things that might happen. It's like, here's the reality of some of the situations. I'm a big fan of Mary Meeker's reports. So like there's a new State of AI report that came out last week that I think is kind of required reading for anybody in the software business or anybody kind of like in business in general. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good LinkedIn pundits who kind of work in the space. Connor Grennan and Ethan Mollick are two that I really like to follow, and sort of like they seem to get early access to a lot of models, and they give pretty level-headed takes on here's what the technology can and can't do, and here's the limitations and the applications. So yeah, all those things in tandem I think are good resources to jump in on.
Awesome. Well, Marshall, I could talk to you for hours, and hopefully we'll do this again soon. But thanks so much. We really appreciate the time, and we'll see you around.
Yeah, great to talk to you, Kevin.